more than 90% of the people who watch my videos on YouTube are men. Now that's weird because about 80% of psychology students are women. So that is not what you would expect, right? You would expect that the majority of them would be women. And you might say, well, it's because of the political stance I've taken. And I thought, well, that's possible. So I went and looked at the demographic data because I have that. Well, before I did any of the political videos, 85% of my viewers were men.
Discover the hidden facets of reputation, narcissism, and dark triads in behavior with Jordan Peterson. Your brain's workings might surprise you.
We always lie to young women about what's going to be important in their lives. We tell them it's going to be all career. Said, I've worked in female-dominated industries my whole life, and what I've observed is, among men and women alike, that it's a very rare person for whom career is the most important thing in their life, even if they're men. Although it's true for more men, it's true for virtually no women by the time they hit 30. And the amount of vitriol that comment generated was unparalleled. And that's something, because I've had plenty of vitriol generated from things I said, but it was all young women, talking about how some old white guy like me had no right to tell young women what to do with their bodies, which I most certainly was not. But it is, you can see a simple pathway there, right? It's like, well, we have this avenue where we can pursue our career and our education and everything else we want, and then we'll be able to solve the problem of having a family. The problem with that is, well, it's hard enough to find a mate when you're 23, 24. By the time you're 30, it's even more difficult. And by the time you're 35, it's starting to become well nigh impossible to find a mate and get pregnant and have a family, especially if you're going to have more than one kid. And so there's a direct conflict there between the avenues that are open to women and the need to strike while the iron's hot on the reproductive front. Nobody really knows how to reconcile that.
Dive into the intricate world of reputation, dark triads, and how your brain deals with antisocial behavior. Jordan Peterson reveals eye-opening insights that challenge common beliefs.
You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working-class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they act properly and honestly and forthrightly, that they can put their lives together and they can help their families and they can make their communities better, and that's not toxic masculinity, that appalling phrase. It's what keeps the world going round. If we had any sense, we'd understand that instead of doing everything at every possible moment to label what we have in the West as oppressive and patriarchal and fundamentally predicated on power, of all the insane propositions. What I see happening to young men in particular, boys as well, not just young men, and maybe even, maybe starting at the age of toddlers, is that we have this sense in the world that human beings live in antagonism to nature and that we're actually a malevolent force, and that our social structures, which are clearly capable of the commission of atrocity, are fundamentally oppressive, patriarchal in their nature. And so then if you're a male in a society with that ethos, the motive force that drives you into the world to live is associated with rapaciousness and despoliation on the natural front, and then oppression and atrocity on the social front. It's like, well then, if you're the least bit conscientious, because this sort of accusation hurts conscientious young men the most, then the best you can do is, well, let's say castrate yourself. How would that be? And that would be real comical, except that it's also happening. So I guess that's why I think there's a crisis. And there's something serious at the root of it, right? Because we do have to take the fact of the potential damage we can do to the natural world and the social world. We have to take that seriously, but the proper consequence of taking that seriously is not to commit harikiri, let's say, in a fit of moral anxiety and take yourself completely out of the game. Boys and girls are different. Men and women are different. It looks biological, but because people are malleable, you could push the socio-cultural structure harder and harder to minimize the biological differences. Okay, well, first of all, maybe and maybe not. Maybe you'd get a rebound and they'd get even, like, the kids would rebel. That could easily happen. But let's say, okay, you could. The problem with that is that if you cede that much power to the state, like, you're basically giving the state the right to socialize your kids.
Right.
It's like, you really? Really? You really want to do that? I mean, the people in Israel couldn't do that with the kibbutzes, right? It didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So people aren't going to give up their children to the state, and thank God for that.
Explore the gender differences in antisocial behavior, the unique ways men and women navigate aggression and reputation. While the male path tends to be physical, females excel in reputation manipulation, making the online world a breeding ground for these tactics. Learn how the wrong incentives on social media platforms could lead to dire consequences.
You know, as women get older, they get better at separating out the narcissists from the competent men. But initially, because the narcissists have this confidence that is a marker of competence, even though not an invariable marker, they can easily be fooled. When I point out that the feminine is symbolized by chaos, well, in their case, it's certainly acting as chaos. And the other thing I should also insist upon is that I don't draw a moral distinction with regards to the utility of order versus chaos. Order is the domain of what we have comprehended and control. And we certainly want to comprehend things and control them because we want things to turn out the way we want them to turn out. And that's the definition of control. But chaos is the domain that surrounds that, from which all new things flow, which is also part of the reason that it's feminine, because the feminine is that from which all new things flow, as well as that which rejects the order and selects. These are very deep issues. They're very fundamental issues. I mean, do your feminist friends also doubt the reality of hypergamy? Because that's the proclivity of women to mate at or up or across or up hierarchies of socioeconomic status. It's been well documented across many, many cultures, although it is ameliorated to some degree in the most egalitarian cultures, as opposed to being exaggerated as personality traits are in those. The difference between men and women, personality is exaggerated in those cultures. Hypergamy is also an indication of the feminine's tendency to reject the current embodiment of order in the form of the masculine entities that present themselves to her, let's say. So I don't think your feminist friends have a leg to stand on with regards to the criticism. I just think they want to have their cake and eat it too, and they haven't read the relevant books, and they like to say things they haven't thought through, and they want, and it's an easy way of dismissing my ideas, and they don't know what they're throwing away when they throw away the feminine identification with chaos and plenitude and generation and creativity and all of that, because somehow they think it's an insult because they don't understand anything about what I'm saying and don't want to. For men, there's nothing but responsibility. You know, I was watching The Simpsons the other day. I watched the first Simpsons episode and I deconstructed it. And so it's really interesting. So what happens in the first Simpson episode is that it's Christmas, and Homer and Marge are going to buy some Christmas presents, but Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus. And so he's absolutely crushed by that. And that actually is a recurring theme in The Simpsons, where Homer loses his job or something like that, or can't make enough money. He's completely crushed. Even though he's kind of useless, bumbling, laughing fool of a guy, you know, the thing that gives that show its soul is that he's still oriented towards his family. That's what makes him honorable, is that foolish as he is, he's decided to adopt responsibility for his family and to try to bear that. And so he's a holy fool. He's not a complete fool.
And it's so interesting watching the story because he suffers dreadfully as a consequence of not being able to fulfill his responsibility. Well, that's for men. Women have their sets of responsibilities. They're not the same, right? Because they're complicated, because women, of course, have to take primary responsibility for having infants at least, but then also for caring for them. They're structured differently than men. For biological necessity, even if it's not a psychological issue, and it's also partly a psychological issue. Women know what they have to do. Men have to figure out what they have to do. And if they have nothing worth living for, then they stay Peter Pan. And why the hell not? Because the alternative to valued responsibility is impulsive, low-class pleasure. And you saw that in the Pinocchio story, right? That's Pleasure Island. It's like, well, why lift a load if there's nothing in it for you? That's another thing that we're doing to men that's a very bad idea. And to boys. It's like, you're pathological and oppressive. It's like, fine then, why the hell am I going to play? If that's the situation, if I get no credit for bearing responsibility, you can bloody well be sure I'm not going to bear any. But then, your life is useless and meaningless, and you're full of self-contempt and nihilism, and that's not good. And so that's why that's what I think's going on at a deeper level with regards to men needing this direction. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. He has to decide that. We've got things backwards in our culture. We're thinking, at least in part, why aren't there more women in positions of power? Wrong question. The right question is, why are there any men at all who want those positions of power? Because it's not just positions of power. You have to be such a knothead to think that. Oh, it's a position of power. It's like, sure, but it's a position of overwhelming responsibility. And if you make mistakes, you're done. Right? It's not like you occupy that position of power and everyone does what they're told all the time and your life is easy. It's like, forget about that. People are on your case to do exactly the right thing all the time, 100% of the time. And maybe you want that and maybe you don't. So I don't know what people think is these people are all sitting in their offices with their feet up on the desk, smoking cigars and oppressing the world. It's like, that isn't how it works. Those people, they work flat out all the time. So, and it's fine if that's what you want, and some people are like that. They're hyper-industrious people, right? From a trait perspective, no matter where you put them. If you put them in a forest with an axe, they just wander around chopping down trees nonstop, right? Because it's built into them. But if you want to have a balanced life, and you should want that, because the other thing you'll find, and this is God's gospel truth, is that the older you get, if you have any sense at all, the more important your family is to you. Like the utility of your career, maybe that peaks around 35 or 40, and it starts to decline pretty rapidly after that. And what happens, if you're fortunate, you have someone in your life that you love, that you've woven yourself together with, and you have some kids so that you have something to do from the time you're 50 till the time you're 80. And so it's a real mistake. It's a barren future without children, man. I can tell you that. It's a real mistake. And so we do a terrible job of say, putting that image forward and saying, well, yeah, now, because women have access to the birth control pill now and can compete in the same domains as men, roughly speaking, there is a real practical problem here. It's partly an economic problem now, because when I was roughly your age, it was still possible for a one-income family to exist